Today I want to just take you down a path of trying to understand ignorance. I know it's a strange topic for someone who tries to claim, or at least has made that claim, for going on 30 years that I'm a motivator. But as I look across what has transpired in the last 6 months, when I look at the evidence that seems to be stacking up on both sides of a philosophical argument, one thing I see is the unending supply of ignorance. And if you go back to Economics 101, the one thing that we are taught is that anytime there is an excess supply, if the demand doesn't match up, you end up with an inventory of an unused supply. But when I look back over the last 6 months, the one thing I see is the unending supply of ignorance, but also the rapid and almost constant consumption of this ignorance. All the evidence of what we see and what we consume seems to go against the grain of our basic convictions. Our very character seems to question this unending ignorance, but somehow in a need to go along to get along, we participate. Now, by nature, I'm a contrarian, so I always try to bring in logic and evidence to see if it matches up with what we are consuming. The other day in a podcast, I recorded these 3 parameters, and some people asked me to explain it in a different way. So I thought I would create a video that would take us down this journey. What are some of the conditions that you are now accustomed to, that you have become a part of in this journey called life? When this new arrival of a disease that is unseen, of a devastation that is incomprehensible, of statistics and numbers that seem to be thrown at you in random directions. Some say you need to focus on the death rate, and it was not that alarming as was originally prescribed and predicted. Some said you need to focus on the elderly and the compassion. Some said that you need to look at the statistics of those that have been afflicted and the nature of their illness. Yet others came across with even one is too much. Someone needs to put an end to this. Well, a government cannot eradicate a virus. A government can only put into place some of the controls that go with it. By the same token, vaccines in the past have been developed for diseases untold, but people still seem to succumb to those diseases. Those are the facts. Now, on the other side of it are the feelings of whether one person's desire to participate in this abundance of ignorance is called righteousness, and the other person's desire to revolt against it is called responsibility. So here we are in the middle. Is there a basis in the middle that says, you know what, we don't need to subscribe to either extreme? I wear a mask and I do it so that I can take care of myself and my responsibility. By the same token, I also sometimes question whether a handshake is somehow not appropriate because that would spread the contagion, but a fist bump may be, or an elbow bump may be. I don't know enough about this virus, but maybe I ask myself the question. It's apparently on your hands because you touch your face, and that's why it should not be on the palm, but it's okay on the sleeve, but when you cough, make sure you cough into your sleeve. So if you're coughing into your sleeve and you go to somebody else and then you give them the fist bump, guess what? You just gave them a fist bump of what was coughed. Now they're saying, hey, the evidence is to the contrary because maybe it's not on surfaces. Hear what I'm saying, not what I'm not saying. All I'm talking about is the abundance of ignorance in terms of supply and the consumption of it in the same in terms of demand. What can you and I do to walk in the middle so we are both responsible where it comes to exercising common civic responsibility? The distance you maintain, the protection you take. By the same token, where in humanity is your righteousness gone that somehow you abdicate every kind of belief because someone else is giving you information? Isn't common sense that middle of the road catalyst that allows you to objectively participate without being consumed emotionally? Can you rationally look at what is going on around us and say, to what end? Is constant unemployment and constant abandonment of social interaction the solution, as some prescribe? Till such time as the whole world is absolutely safe, we will not participate in anything. Well, dignity of labor, dignity of design, dignity of who we are as a people comes under question because that idleness becomes that devil's workshop. So the three components that I have utilized during this time that have given me some modicum of sanity is one, be ahead of information in the sense that always have a sense to discern. The sources of information always play a huge role. If you subscribe to one series of channels, then their information is always going to be on the side of arrogance, and the other side is going to be on the side of ignorance. But what about you? A common sense, a man who is created in the image of God and given the mind and the spirit to be above all of the other animal species. First, are you hearing information? Are you listening to it? Offset in communication components was that hearing is involuntary. It's sound vibrating on the eardrum. So anytime I see a group of 6 talking heads get together to debate the outcome of something that marginal society that they have no clue about needs to adhere to, I immediately put my filters up. Is some of the information I'm getting from them distorted to suit their agenda? Is some of the information they are receiving being deleted before it's being given to me so that it fits a narrative? And this is on both sides of the political spectrum. Remember, I'm trying to operate from the middle to say, how do you not participate in ignorance as a consumer so you can stop its never-ending supply as someone else who is providing? So are you hearing the information which is empty sound vibrating on the eardrum, or are you listening to it with discernible filters that say, how does this apply to me? Does it affect my standard of living? Does it change my quality of life? If I participate in it to the degree, will I be able to protect those that are elderly and infirm? If I do not participate in it, will I be impacting someone else? Am I taking a risk or am I taking a gamble? Corporate strategy has always told me a calculated risk means you weigh the pros and cons. Now remember, I have not talked about this virus or this contagion for the simple reason that I'm not an expert, but I understand logic. They're telling me that if I get tested, I may not be tested positive for it, but I may get tested positive for it tomorrow, which means a test today that is negative does not mean that I am not a carrier of it. By the same token, if I'm asymptomatic and do not have the disease, then I don't know if I carry it. If that's the case, what is my guilt? My guilt is, do I stop participating in life because I'm asymptomatic? Wait, they told me that if they tested me and I'm negative, I may test positive for it tomorrow. So it doesn't mean that between today when I test negative and tomorrow if I test positive, again, I'm rendered useless. So this goes back to that old philosophical conundrum that at any given time we possibly have it and don't have it, and at any given time we may get it or not get it. If that's the case, does humanity cease to exist? What am I hearing, and am I listening to the edicts? The number of people that are killed because of smoking is far greater. The number of people who are killed by drinking is far greater, but they didn't seem to make any adjustments there. So what they're saying is, to me, I have to be careful. That is no longer a moral argument. It's no longer a civil argument. It's no longer an argument because there is no data on each side that is definite. By the same token, I've often told my staff and those around me that, listen, I want to be a hope giver. So when I listen to information that is coming from all these channels, my first thing is, are they giving me any hope for the future? If the information to me is useless in the sense that it renders me incompetent and it puts me on the side of not being productive, then I have to question its motive. Why would anybody not want to give hope in this world and only talk about despair and destruction? So the first sense, are you listening to the information, which means you're able to discern and make a judgment for yourself based on what is right for you and how you operate? Or are you just listening to empty pandering that is constantly barraging you with negativity. My mentor Zig Ziglar used to do this about traffic. He says when you hear of traffic, they always talk about the jam, the accident, the block up, the backup, and the delay. Not one traffic reporter will come on and with considerable confidence of their own conviction based on data say, you know what, today 99.9% of the people will reach. So sometimes when I'm listening to information, even if it is deadly, I want some hope so that I can react in a way that gives me tomorrow. If you're reacting in a way that prevents my today and damns my yesterday, then what is the hope you're giving me for tomorrow? Second, am I just viewing or am I observing? Again, I'll go back to that old poem which I've quoted many times by William James that I first heard Ravi Zacharias talk about, and that is, this eye's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole and goads us to believe a lie when we see with and not through the eye. We were designed to see through the eye with a conscience, not with the eye devoid of one. If you are just a voyeur, if you're just viewing the information so you can fortify your opinion or become someone who becomes an expert because you're viewing it, you're doing yourself no justice and you're helping no one else. By observation, again, you let the information pass through you with some kind of sense and sensibility. When the news says breaking, so many people died, I immediately ask myself, is this number greater than or smaller than the previous report? If the issue is just to articulate that there is death, we already know that 100% of humanity will die. If I countered with that argument, I'd look silly because we're dealing with the broad pace of living versus the response or the succumbing to this contagion. So the first question is always to ask yourself, are you hearing information which is empty, hollow sound, or are you listening to it with discernment? The second is, are you viewing it for the sake of being scintillated by that which is paraded and validating that which you already believe? Or are you observing it saying, what is their intent? Ravi Zacharias, the late great Ravi Zacharias said, anytime you're asked a question, always question the assumption of the questioner. I think you can take it one step further in this viewing and observation. When you're observing a news report or when you're observing something, whatever it is, when you're observing something that is visual, always ask yourself, what is the basic premise that they are trying to convey? And as a consumer of it, do I have to take their assumptions for having made the declaration and my own assumptions for how I'm going to receive it? First, are you hearing or are you listening? Second, are you viewing or are you observing? And third, are you relaying or are you communicating? I hope when I do these little messages that I'm communicating, that I'm actually focusing on the intent behind it and not just the content of it. So when I hear again information or listen to dissect that which I'm hearing, the same applies to the way I communicate. Someone called me the other day and said, what is your fundamental reason? What is the fundamental premise? What is the formula you use to communicate? And I use that illustration that intent, as Ravi Zacharias puts it, intent is prior to content. You can always add content when you communicate, but your desire of intent is, do you want to move the needle? In days of old of communication, they said that when Cicero spoke, people stood and clapped. When Demosthenes spoke, they stood and marched. How do you gauge what you're doing? If you're just relaying information to get a rise out of people, they may applaud for you. But in order to have long-term voluntary change in their attitudes and behaviors, learn to communicate. This morning I was listening to statistics of everything in this last year and a half that has killed more people than this virus has. And every one of those things, when you debate them, become a moral issue. And that's very vital to understand. The interesting part of the human experience is just that. Where do your convictions lie? Are your convictions shaped and your character defined by the conditions you live in? And do you then succumb to someone's altering of those conditions by giving you a little more comfort in your physicality? Or do you go back to the depths of your own soul and question the origins of your own mind and say, I was designed for accomplishment, I was engineered for success, I was endowed with the seeds of greatness? There are 7.3 billion, 7.85 billion people on planet Earth, and God in his infinite wisdom just made one of me. So today, when you look at this broad supply of ignorance, and you may chop me up into that category, ask yourself, are you increasing the supply of ignorance because you have not stopped demanding it? Or are you going to be on that side saying, if I'm going to make sure that this ignorance supply stops and I'm going to stop being a consumer, then I'm going to start listening to what is offered, not just hearing. I'm going to start observing what I watch, not just view. And then I'm going to communicate what I need to say, not just relay it. Until next time, we hope that this information and this missive has blessed you. Good luck. God bless.